Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible upsets in all of military history, the Battle of Agincourt. This is the story of how a sick, starving, and ridiculously outnumbered army, cornered deep in enemy territory, pulled off a victory that, by all logic, should never have happened. So let's just paint the picture here. On one side, you have King Henry V's English army. We're talking maybe 6,000 men, outnumbered at least 3-1. They're exhausted, riddled with dysentery, and completely trapped. On the other side, a massive French force, well-rested, loaded with heavy armor, fighting on their home turf, and absolutely smelling blood in the water. For the English, the odds weren't just bad, they were basically zero. So how on earth did the impossible happen? Now, the easy answer you always hear is the longbow, but honestly, that's just a tiny piece of the puzzle. The real victory was a perfect storm of a game-changing weapon, some brilliant tactics, and an unexpected and very, very muddy ally. Right, so everybody points to this one secret weapon, the longbow. And look, it was absolutely devastating. But the bow itself wasn't the secret. The real weapon was the system behind it, how it was used, combined with some seriously smart tactics and ironclad discipline. You have to think of the English longbow as the machine gun of the Middle Ages. Seriously. Made from powerful yew wood, a skilled archer could fire off maybe 15 arrows in a single minute. That's nearly 5 times faster than a French crossbowman could manage. With thousands of archers all firing at once, it wasn't a volley of arrows, it was a literal hailstorm of death. And think about the sheer power it took to use one of these things. War bows that have been recovered show a draw weight of over 150 pounds. This wasn't a hobby. It was a lifelong commitment that literally changed your body. Archaeologists have found skeletons of longbowmen with deformed shoulders and twisted spines, a testament to the years and years of brutal training it took to master this weapon. But, of course, a great weapon is pretty useless if you don't have the right strategy. And Henry's plan was a work of tactical genius. First, he packed his army with archers, making them the absolute core of his force. Second, he gave them a simple but brilliant defense, a fence of sharpened stakes angled out to impale any charging horses. And third, he demanded absolute unwavering discipline. Nobody breaks rank, period. But you know, even the best strategy in the world can fall apart. For the English, though, their greatest weapon that day wasn't something they brought with them. It was the ground itself, thanks to a powerful, totally uncontrollable ally, the weather. For days before the battle, it had rained. Hard, and it turned the freshly plowed battlefield into something else entirely. We're not just talking about some mud puddles. It was a deep, sticky, sucking quagmire that would become a weapon all on its own. And right here, you can see the fatal flaw for the French. Their greatest strength, the knight in shining armor wearing up to 50 kilograms of steel, suddenly became a huge liability. Every single step in that deep mud was absolutely exhausting. Meanwhile, the English archers, with little or no armor, were light, they were agile, and they could stay on their feet. The mud was the great equalizer, completely wiping out the French advantage before the battle even really started. So this stage is set. You have a tired army with a killer weapon, dug in behind a wall of stakes on a field that's basically a swamp. What happened next was a perfect storm of chaos that French writers would later call the accursed day. The French collapse was terrifyingly quick. Their cavalry charged, but they got shredded by the stakes and the arrow storm. The terrified horses, wounded and panicked, turned and crashed right back into their own infantry, creating this horrible, struggling pileup of men and animals in the thick mud. The French knights, trapped and unable to move, were sitting ducks. And that's when the English archers dropped their bows, pulled out axes and daggers, and just waded into the mess to finish them off. The final numbers are just staggering. The French lost around 7,000 men. An entire generation of their nobility was wiped out in a single afternoon. The English, their losses were maybe a few hundred. It wasn't just a defeat for France, it was a national catastrophe. But the story of Agincourt isn't some simple, heroic fairy tale. When you start to really dig into the legend, a much more complicated and, honestly, a much darker picture starts to emerge. Yeah, so modern historians have pretty much busted some of the biggest myths. That popular idea that English arrows just sliced through French plate armor? Not really. The armor was actually very effective. The real targets were the unarmored horses, and their panic is what caused all the chaos. And the longbow didn't win the battle alone, not even close. But most importantly, that shiny image of a heroic, chivalrous victory gets shattered by one of Henry's own brutal decisions. Right in the middle of the battle, Henry got word that there might be a second French attack coming from behind him. He looked at the thousands of valuable prisoners he'd taken, and he made a ruthless calculation. They were now a liability he couldn't afford. So he gave a shocking order: kill them, all of them. It was a cold-blooded move that completely violated the rules of war, and it left a dark stain on his victory. So after all that, after this stunning, brutal victory, what was the prize? Well, for a brief, shining moment, it looked like Henry V had won everything he had ever dreamed of. The victory at Agincourt led directly to a huge political win. 5 years later, the Treaty of Troyes was signed. It basically disinherited the French heirs and named Henry V the next king of France. He had, for all intents and purposes, conquered the kingdom in a single battle. But, and this is a really big but, this incredible triumph was built on sand. Just 2 years after signing that treaty, Henry V himself was dead from dysentery, the same disease that plagued his army at Agincourt. His son was just an infant and couldn't hold on to the crown. Then a new French hero, Joan of Arc, appeared and rallied her people. Within a single generation, pretty much everything Henry had won was gone. And that leaves us with one of history's great ironies. Agincourt was a tactical masterpiece, a legendary victory that won a crown. But it was a crown that crumbled into dust almost as soon as it was won, guaranteeing decades more of brutal war. So you have to ask, was the impossible victory ultimately worth it? That's the question that still haunts the legacy of Agincourt.